Bolshevik economic policy 1918 to 1929. War communism 1918 to 1921. Background. The introduction of war communism was simply an application of communist ideology. State capitalism was the Bolsheviks throwing sweets at the peasants and workers to make them happy and gain their support, but it was economically disastrous, so drastic measures would be needed if they were to fight and win the Civil War. This included the introduction of war communism. Objective. Their main objective was political, to win the Civil War and to ensure the survival of Bolshevism. War communism policy. Industry. Industries were nationalised and put under state control. Private trade was banned and hierarchical structures were reintroduced into the army and industry. This was Lenin being pragmatic. He understood that he needed to go back on some communist ideologies to allow Bolshevism to survive. War communism policy. Agriculture. Food was forcibly requisitioned from the peasantry to feed the Red Army. Millions of peasants starved as their food was taken. Rationing was introduced. Millions of peasants were starving, but Lenin, even though he helped them in the revolution, said he didn't have enough time for the peasantry. Lenin understood that it was necessary to put communist ideology to the side to ensure their win in the Civil War and for Bolshevism to survive. Success and failure. War communism succeeded in winning the Civil War and achieving its aim, but it did have a disastrous economic result as it failed to achieve its economic objectives. The peasants greatly resented the forcible requisitioning of grain and they chose to kill their livestock. Food production fell and the transport system collapsed, which resulted in a widespread famine. Roughly 1 in 5 people were starving in Russia. Some peasants resulted in cannibalism. Due to the shortages in towns, almost half of the inhabitants of Russian cities left them between 1918 and 1920 to live in the countryside. Industry came to a standstill, with the workers working slower and going on strike, which led to the banning of trade unions and for the police to open fire on strikers without Bolsheviks' permission. There was over 20 million dead from famine and disease. Why the policy changed. War communism was not working and would not cope with the situation post-Civil War. The unpopularity of the policy amongst the peasantry came to a head in a series of risings in 1920 to 1921. The Tambov Rising in central Russia was a response to the requisitioning and took 50,000 Red Army troops to put it down. Pressure further increased with the Kronstadt Mutiny in 1921, a revolt by sailors at a naval base who had been the Bolsheviks' most loyal supporters. They wanted an end to ballot riggings, freedom of the press and other non-communist based aspects of the system. The communists were shaken by this and reacted with a deadly force by throwing 50,000 soldiers at the sailors, which resulted extinguishing the revolt 2 weeks from the beginning. This showed that the Bolshevik supporters were growing impatient and there was protest against Bolshevik policies. War communism succeeded in winning a civil war, but it was an economic and political disaster after, so it needed to be abandoned. So Lenin brought in the new economic policy, NEP.